The Tianjin photograph touched a raw nerve in in the West, and for some reason, whether you like it or not, it was headlines in all mainstream
Yeah,
Western newspapers and the media.
yeah,
And that was quite funny, actually, that suddenly they realized there is something called RIC when it has been in existence for, I don't know, 15, 20 years.
yeah.
Tianjin was, I think, a response to a lot of anger in India about this 50%, about this absolutely absurd accusation and the warmongering coming out of Washington from cabinet officials, absurd allegations that India was responsible for the Ukraine war, we were funding it and all,
Mhm.
ridiculous. So there was a huge amount of anger, and it's just that the government kind of kept its cool. But outside of the government, people were saying, what the hell is going on? I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, the Europeans built the Russian war chest by importing energy for the last, since 1950 or 60, for
Yeah.
50, 60 years. You built your entire economic prosperity on cheap Russian energy. And now, for the last 2 years, if India is importing, we are supposed to be responsible for the war? I mean, what is this nonsense? So there was zero credibility on the American allegations.
Welcome to Conversations. I'm Muqtedar Khan, your host, and I have with me a very, very distinguished scholar, diplomat, and a policy expert from India, Mr. Pankaj Saran, who has served as India's Deputy National Security Advisor. He was ambassador to Russia and Bangladesh. I found that very interesting, especially given the times that we live in, your experience in Bangladesh. You have also served as a joint secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. So you have one of those rare combination of. I mean, you have done what Marco Rubio is doing, both national security and foreign affairs, right? One
Yeah,
of the interesting things that we have in our classes is trying to separate foreign policy from national security policy. And even grad students
correct.
sometimes tend to get confused between the two. So today we are fortunate to have with us Ambassador Saran, and we will talk to him about the profound changes that are taking place not only in the global order but also in India's foreign and national security policy. I want to start with a cliche, Ambassador Saab. The cliche is that the only thing that seems to be constant is change. That's the only thing that we can say, that everything is changing. So, from your perspective, do you think that the kind of changes, I mean, Dr. Jaishankar has been talking about this for the last 5 years. And 3 years ago, he looked optimistic because he thought the change would lead to a multipolar world, which was in India's favor. But now change seems to be more uncertainty and more risk to all of us. So, how do you assess the risk that we are seeing in this world, the changes, especially from the Indian point of view?
Yeah, firstly, thank you very much, Muqtadir, for having me on your show. I've seen and I know that you're one of the most prolific commentators and YouTubers and continuing interest in India, which is very welcome. We need people who, take the time and trouble to understand modern India. So thank you very much. On the risk, yesterday I was talking to a few people about the past, and it was interesting to reflect on the way the world has moved and is moving. And the more we talk, the more I realize that actually, if you look at some moments in history which are of profound change and compare those with what we are going through today, it gives us some perspective on how serious and profound the current changes are compared to the past. The one milestone which I think was very important as far as India is concerned, and of course the world, was 1991, which was basically supposed to be the end of history.
Mhm.
And that is when all the problems of the world were solved, and we were supposed to enter the golden era of a liberal world order, of universalization, of democracy, of human rights, let's say Western values. I mean, it was the collapse of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War, the the reunification of Germany, And at the same time, India was in the middle of an economic crisis, the worst it had faced since 1947. We were on the verge of bankruptcy, and that entire decade of the 90s was one where there was huge political instability in India. We had our prime minister being assassinated. We had coalition governments every 12 months. So it was a really terrible period. And remember, in 1991, the sole pillar of Indian foreign strategic security policy was Moscow. And so you actually had a situation where that pillar just collapsed in front of your eyes. We had nowhere to go. So externally, we were disrupted badly. Domestically, we were in serious trouble. So we lived through all of that, and I think it's a great tribute to the resilience of the Indian state, how far we have traveled. Now, coming to 2026, I mean, clearly, I think there is no question that we have a peculiar situation on our hands where the major powers of the world have chosen to act more or less unilaterally without much concern for what we assumed were international principles or the international post-World War order, starting with, let us say, the Russian march into Ukraine 2022. But before that, I would also say the abrupt withdrawal of the US and NATO forces from Afghanistan, ending a 20-year project to re engineer that society and basically admitting that they failed to do so. It was also by then the culmination of a series of the Gulf never ending wars, which we had witnessed through the 2010s and so on. And then we had this Russia Ukraine situation. And on the Indian side, you had India receiving hundreds and thousands of Chinese troops on the Tibetan border in the Himalayas. All of this is happening more or less within a period of 1 year, and not to speak of the pandemic. And now, of course, we have the Trump phenomenon,
The
which
pandemic.
is, I think, the well,
Sorry.
I think history will judge the right description, but there is no doubt that this is a huge, huge disruption emanating from one individual, one person. And so here we are, and there is nothing that seems to be taboo anymore. Whether you want to destroy societies, bomb cities, hospitals, I mean, it seems as if there is no restraint on what a major power believes it can rightly do, abducting presidents. So we actually are at a very, I would say, serious stage of how nations deal with each other. And so people are kind of very upset. And Mark Carney's speech in Davos was a manifestation of this, of a revolt. Interestingly, not from the global south, but from, let's say, the global north itself, from within. And so this is basically, I think, where we are today. And we don't know which way this is going to go. At the same time, what we have, very different from the 20th century, is that we have a huge rising power which believes that it is a matter of time before it can replace the existing hegemon. So we have a dyad of global
Mhm.
political and military power, and other countries are also rising, other nations are rising. But broadly speaking, the global south, if I can use that word, is not as quiet or accepting of the situation as it was just in the immediate aftermath of the end of colonialism, because at that time in the 50s and 60s, the newly independent countries were weak. They didn't have much agency. Today, 70, 80 years down the line, they have a view, they're not scared to put it across. So this is where we are. We are watching with dismay that we are losing control of the compact that governed the world for 80 years. We have no idea what is going to come in its place. And since this is a world without restraint, it's become even more dangerous. And uh, so, this is, I would say, as an introductory comment, this is what
So,
I would say.
ambassadors are one of the things. Like if you were having this conversation, say in 23, uh, and or even in 24 after Prime Minister Modi's visit to my state, Delaware, where he met Joe Biden, which was also the last summit of the Quad heads of state summit. So at that time, there was no doubt that the most important dynamics were US China, and the most important partnership was US India. In 2024, if anyone didn't answer that question that way, they would get an F. The most important challenge is US China, the most important partnership was US India. But now, what Trump has done is he's put a big question mark on this issue of US India partnership. I don't know whether you saw the piece I sent you today's. Yeah,
I saw
in
that. Yeah, I
today's
saw that.
Hindu, I
Yeah.
raised this issue that Marco Rubio's visit, from my perspective, actually, I titled it originally as Mission Impossible, his mission to India to fix this relationship. So, from your point of view, given the fact that you have seen the internal side of diplomatic relations, do you think that this is a blip? And once Trump's second term is over, perhaps both the countries will be back to where we were, say, in 2023. We would have lost maybe 5 years, but we could resume the same partnership? Or do you think Donald Trump has had such a strong negative impact that India and the US will have to find, we are on different paths going forward? How do you see that?
Yeah, Muqtadir, this is a question which everyone is asking in India, and I think it's a very fundamental question and a very important question to ask. I think the blip word is probably an exaggeration, and I think the answer to the question, unfortunately, will have to be nuanced because it's not a yes or a no. Some of the impulses or trends in the Trumpian approach to India uh, were in existence even before Trump. They were not articulated as frontally as the Trump people are doing. But the idea, for example, that somehow India was a free rider, that the United States has put in a lot of effort into the relationship, but was not getting enough back from India, or that India was, despite statements to the contrary, still hesitant in putting its eggs into the American basket. Uh, Similarly, on the trade front, the the feeling of being unequal, the feeling that India was hesitant in the Quad, uh, the kind of discomfort with the India-Russia ties, all of this was in existence in different parts of DC inside the Beltway, in different parts of the US Washington elite, except that at the political level, they were not articulated as boldly as they are. So the difference, I think, today under the Trump people is that all of these thoughts, bad thoughts about India, have now come into the open. And so, to some extent, the Indian elites are not completely surprised. Um, I mean, you had Christopher Landau coming a few months ago to the Raisina dialogue in Delhi, and in front of a pretty glittering audience of the Indian strategic elites, basically saying, we are not going to make the same mistake as we did with China when it comes to the rise of India. Now, that's a really brave statement to make. I don't think it was a mistake. But did Indians not know that this may be a thinking in the US establishment? I don't think so. I think people knew that, yes, how much do we trust the US in terms of the rise of India and the US attitude to India's rise. So a lot of the what is going on in the last 18 months uh, is a kind of a resurgence or of all these animistic tendencies, if I can call them, on India, coupled with what Trump himself stands for and his MAGA base stands for. And it is quite obvious that everything that he's doing commands huge support among the
Yeah.
MAGA crowd in the United States. Otherwise, he wouldn't be doing all that. So, bashing India, and making all kinds of absurd allegations, basically destroying everything that was built over the 20-year period. So the Americans are telling us that no, it's got nothing to do with you. It's a re-engineering of the American global view. Partly true also, when you talk about, when you look at the national security strategy, the statements by senior cabinet officials, statements by Trump himself. Basically, we would have never imagined, forget India, American the ruling American political system getting elected on the premise that the global order is wrong, that globalization is a mistake, there is no such thing as a liberal world order, and that everything that we believed was was good for the entire world and for the Americans is wrong, and that we have to therefore uh, throw it out of the window, literally, and make new rules. The United Nations is a waste of time and money. So this is not India specific. So how India fits into this bigger picture is the real issue. Also saying we are going to retreat into the Western Hemisphere and we are not going to take over the burden of the rest of the world. We are not interested in whether a poor country like India or anyone else in Africa or anyone else, we are not into burden sharing.
Yeah.
Their prosperity is none of our business. Establishing peace and stability and building societies in the rest of the world is none of our business. So if you're, and which is what we are faced with, how much of this is going to change in a pro-Trumpian, in a post-Trumpian era is the question. So I would say, yes, there would be, so there are some issues which will abide post-Trump in terms of a more inward-looking America because of its own internal challenges that it faces, economic and social. So that tendency to look after yourself and to retreat will probably survive Trump. Uh, But on the other hand, there are issues which might not become so, let's say, what's the word? Brutal in their application as far as the India relationship is concerned.
Yeah.
There may be a little roundness or a softening of the approach. But I'm also worried about the increasing the attitude towards the Indian community, the contribution of Indian Americans. This was something which was also a consensus, I mean, on both
In
sides.
the US. Yeah.
But so if you're challenging all these assumptions, so I would say, to answer your question, I think what people are taking away from India is that these were real strands which existed. They have surfaced, they've come with a bang. We cannot assume that they will disappear, and therefore you have to prepare yourself for shocks and a different kind of an America, even if Trump goes away and a completely different political complexion takes over the White House. But it's very unlikely for Indians to move forward on the assumption that the old America is going to come back. It's a question of degrees.
It's basically what you're telling me is that we've been throwing the dirty linen under the bed for so long that it suddenly started stinking in such a way that the stink became unbearable, I think, under the Trump administration. But I also share your view. In fact, I gave a couple of talks in Delhi, one at Vivekananda Foundation, one at JNU and other universities. And this is the point I was making, that the Indian strategic community should seriously consider that the American elite has downgraded the strategic significance of India to the US. I think from an American point of view, that is how I see that we don't see India as a fundamentally critical partnership to deal with the global order and the rise of China. We can find an alternative way. Maybe a G2 could be the alternative to Indo-Pacific. Trump has already had two summits with Xi Jinping, one in Busan. But I also want to remind you that during the election of 2020, there was such polarity in the advocacy positions that Biden and Trump were taking. But once Biden became president, except for environment, there was hardly any difference. Environment and Ukraine were the only two differences between Biden and Trump. But in the Middle East, it was all the same. And the Indo Pacific was actually Trump's idea, which then Biden ran with it, elevated it. So, in many ways, what was to me quite shocking when I did the postmortem was that there was very slight change from Trump to Biden. And so I suspect that even if you have a Democratic president coming in, the language might change, but the assumptions about the world politics may not change. They may be nicer in the way they talk. But if you have somebody like JD Vance or Rubio coming, then what you probably are going to end up with is a very sophisticated version of Trump rather than a different version of it. You were going to say something. Yeah.
Yeah, no, no, I was saying you're making a lot of points here. I mean, on the strategic importance of India in the US global picture and China, etc. You look, I think what has happened is that if this is the strategic outlook, fit into that, then you are important to me.
Yeah.
I don't really need you for anything else. You tell me if you're of use to me. Can you help me to make America great again? And from that point of view, everyone is subsidiary and
Yeah.
secondary to that primary goal.
Yeah.
So if you can prove your utility, then you rise up the pecking order. But if you are not, then you cannot. On China and the Biden-Trump difference, I would say the other big difference. There are big differences. I don't think it's a marginal shift from Biden to Trump. I think it's a rupture. I don't think we should underestimate or try to see continuity or
Mhm.
just a question of degree. There is a rupture. For example, the Trump America is not concerned with evangelization of US values, of
Yeah.
democracy, of human rights they couldn't care less. Whether it is Russia, whether it is any other, Pakistan, Myanmar, they are dealing with the world as it is. The Biden folks and that strand of American political thought was that we have to export these values and they will become the determining values in how we conduct relations with other countries. So, in the case of India, the Biden, one of the first articles he wrote, I think, for Foreign Affairs just before he became president, was that the first thing he would do in the first year of his presidency would be to hold a summit of democracies.
Yeah. Which is.
So, so the democracy part of the whole
Mm.
menu was very important for the Biden people and that strand. This time, under this, it's completely different. In fact, even this question of globalization has been completely thrown out of the window. In fact, the American officials sound like the Chinese or the Russians when they talk about globalization, and they basically we've been had. So I would only say that there is a huge disruption, uh, even on and even if you take one by one, Ukraine, Middle East, China. So we just talked about the global order and the global economy, but if you take political issues like Ukraine, the Middle East, and China, on each of these, there are big differences. For example, if you take the Middle East, the Biden and the Trump approach are completely different. Completely different. I mean, I have seen successive US presidents over the last 25, 30 years. I was posted in the region, spending their entire political capital trying to make peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians,
Yeah.
starting from the Oslo Accords. And, we have a whole broken history of failure.
From
But
73.
what, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But, through the 90s, the 2000s, the whole attempt, every American president, almost like an Indian prime minister about Pakistan, would take office believing he could make peace in the Middle East because that was supposed to be the bedrock. Because everyone wanted to repeat a Camp David
Yeah.
after 1979, which of course never happened, but everyone tried. And Biden also tried that to a large extent. Biden, I think, was confused about how to handle the post 7th October 2023 world. But the Trump people have not wasted time. Their
No.
approach is whether to Israel, whether to the Gulf, and obviously to Iran. When you look at Ukraine, huge difference between Biden and Trump. It's a massive difference. For a sitting American president and a president who was campaigning to actually say this war should never have happened. And this is entirely the fault of the Europeans and the Biden people, almost saying that you provoked the Russians into doing what they did. It's a huge change. It's a
Yeah.
complete different way to look at the situation. And that has led to the massive problems between US and Europe. China, again, very different approach to China. I mean, yes, it's a very different approach even between Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0. I mean, Trump 1.0 began with the Quad and elevating to a summit. Trump 2.0 is a completely different view of China. In fact, if you look at the documents which they put out on China and the Indo-Pacific and all,
Very different
you
view.
would be justified to assume or to conclude that there is a big element of accommodation
Yeah.
with the Chinese. And the Biden people went ahead with all the legislation in the US Congress to deny China technology, access, CHIPS Act, this, that. So I would say it's a big change. Question is what kind of a post-Trump presidency you will have, and I tend to agree with you that if there is a Vance or a Rubio, the broad stream would be similar. There would be perhaps difference in style and in in emphasis on different aspects. But look, it doesn't matter who comes. The fact of the matter is that China has tasted blood. You have conferred on him and given it the legitimacy of an equivalent power that they were working for since 1949, since let's say 1978.
Yeah.
So that they have achieved. The question is, where do the two go from here? I mean,
Yeah.
that really is the issue.
I want to turn a little bit towards India and India's role in the other crises that we are seeing in the Gulf. Uh, uh, Given that the prime minister went to Israel just a couple of days before the war started, and his statement, I'm saying with full conviction that India stands with Israel. Some people, including yours truly, feel that India ended its long held policy under this administration of multi alignment. And it does appear as if India has indirectly chosen sides. It's not blatantly with Israel as the US was, but the fact that it has never condemned the US or Israel for its attacks on Iran, many violations of international and humanitarian law, especially the attack on the schools or the unarmed ship that had come to India. So there are all of those examples where India has refrained from being critical of the US or Israel. Even the sort of, disabling the possibility of a consensual statement by SCO in 2025, and then again the BRICS foreign minister statement. All of this clearly shows that India's own policy is fundamentally changing on the issue of multi-alignment. So my question to you is this a fundamental shift in India's uh, outlook towards the Gulf and the Middle East, or is this a way by which India is trying to cope with the aggressiveness of the Trump administration? That's my question. Is there a fundamental change in India's thinking, or is it just a short-term way of dealing with Trump because Delhi doesn't want to confront Washington on issues which are not immediately, close to India itself, right? With say for the sake of Chabahar or for Iran, why get into a fight with the world's sole superpower?
Yeah, great question. I think it's a bit of both. It's a bit of both India's own, kind of independent agency and also a bit of compulsion. Because, but again, you've many things here. Multi-alignment. You know, when we pursued multi-alignment, we were criticized because people said, you don't know what you want. You're just a confused, blundering giant. Now, if I accept your proposition that we have dropped multi-alignment and decided to align, that also becomes a reason for criticism.
Yeah.
So if you do, you're damned. If you don't, you're damned. That is what I would say as initial reaction to what you're saying. Uh, you know, there are no easy and perfect solutions to the Middle East problem and the conundrum as far as India is concerned. On the one hand, India was invited for the Board of Peace. We played this masterly kind of attitude where we said neither yes nor no, but we didn't join. That was seen by Trump. So there are issues on which you can give in, there are issues which you are not giving in. In 2003, the Americans proposed to us that you send Indian forces in the invasion of Iraq. We said no. And that was again at a time when the relationship was flourishing quite well. This time around, I would agree with you that there is a much greater and a more visible alignment between India and Israel on the situation in the Middle East, which I think has come across. Uh, you know, there are many reasons for this, but definitely, or it also could be because of a certain the nature of the Indian government, the political complexion of the government. They are an avowed right of center party. They have historically been strong proponents of a strong Indo-Israeli relationship, and they don't make any bones about it. But they feel they can do this because they have also moved far ahead of any previous government in developing ties with some of the Gulf monarchies in the last 10 years, and in particular with the UAE and the Saudis. So they feel they have the moral right to be actually pushing the boundaries of India's engagement in that region with all major powers. And therefore, they also realized that they were the direct beneficiaries of the Abraham Accords. They were, in fact, the originators before Trump of the IMEC and the I2U2 initiatives. So you could see a developing contour of India's um, policy to, and I think some of the relationships, particularly with the UAE, if you just look at the nuts and bolts of it, it's enormous. I mean, the UAE is a tiny country compared to the Saudi thing, but the intensity and the scale of the relationship is enormous. Uh, so I think we did all that, but and that explains a lot of what we did. Also, there is concern here about uh, radical Islam and its the organizations which have flourished in the Middle East, and how there could possibly be an impact in the South Asian theater, Hamas or Hezbollah or other people. Israel has been a great supporter of India when India was in trouble from a security point of view. But having said that, there is also, just for example, as in Europe, a lot of unease about what Israel is doing in
Yeah.
terms of the Gaza and the genocide and the killings, and as you mentioned about the American attacks on Iran last year and this year. So if you so in terms of the morality and the values and the righteousness, I don't think there's much support in India for what either the Americans or the Israelis have done or are doing. In fact, people are just being a little careful. But if you scratch the surface, uh, they have won no friends in India, both the Americans and the Israelis, for the manner in which they have prosecuted these threats and attacks including on Iran, not to speak of the Gaza genocide. So even on Iran, and that is something which the Iranians appreciate and recognize. So there is an element of compulsion because you are not, you have vulnerabilities. So you have to be realistic. You have to run a country. You have to manage an economy of this size. You have to make sure that you don't do anything which, and then, as far as the India-America relationship is concerned, if you think you don't want to cross swords with America on every single issue, you have to pick your fights. What is the real non-negotiable for us? It is Pakistan. It is Kashmir. On that, it is a non-negotiable. But in the Middle East, maybe you can, accommodate to
Yeah.
an extent.
One of the things that I found quite interesting is that a lot of people feel that India has one thing in common, which is the fight against radical Islam. But I feel that the best friend that India has at the moment in South Asia is radical Islam, which is the Taliban. We are a relationship, the best relationship that India has out of 8 countries are with the Taliban, the radical Islamic group. So I think that Indians should stop saying we have a problem with radical Islam. We are best friends with radical Islam. But moving to a more serious thing, a lot of people here, including professors like John Mearsheimer, yours truly, Wali Nasser, and others, feel that America has lost this war with Iran, and so it is quite possible that a much more stronger, more confident, more assertive Iran is going to emerge out of this war. It is quite possible, also wealthier, if the $24 billion is transferred. Given the fact that India has taken positions which, if anybody were to do a review of India-Iran relations now, would not look favorable. So you think we might have an issue there in in the new Gulf that India so closely aligned with UAE and Israel might have a problem now with a stronger, angrier Iran?
Yeah, firstly, I am with you. I think this has been the biggest blunder strategically, militarily, and politically for the American action in Iran. I think it's a mistake, and they have been caught, and they've been sucked in, and there is no easy way out. The only way out would be for a unilateral declaration of victory, and they've been really exposed. And I think this is what everyone else in the world, the Chinese, the Russians, and the Europeans of the world are figuring out. I think even the Pakistanis, by the way, read it the same way. I mean, everyone's watching it, and I don't think there's much disagreement on the point that, except for a minuscule minority in Washington, for political purposes, are painting a different picture of the actual reality. So that is something which it's quite evident. I mean, you've basically blown it. On what a post-war Iran will look like, etc. Remember, you are right to some extent, but also keep in mind that despite all the difficulties and stresses in how India approached Iran, we were one of the few countries, maybe perhaps the only, which managed to get our cargoes, our oil cargoes through the Hormuz in the last 60, 70, 80 days. And we were in constant touch with Iran through all kinds of channels, which enabled Indian cargoes and vessels to pass through. I think the Iranians understand. So I'm not very pessimistic. I'm not pessimistic about the future of India-Iran relations. I think these are very strong. Um, there could be a little hiccup here or there, but I don't think we will land up in a situation where Iran, after this whole thing is over, will begin to settle scores with India. I don't
Mm.
think we are going to be in that situation. My own view is that the structural uh, fault lines between Iran and Pakistan are much more than between Iran and India. And if you talk to anyone, and I've spoken to a lot of our former ambassadors who've served in Iran, who followed Iran, universal feedback. You tell anyone on the streets of Iran you're from India, your friend. You tell anyone you're from Pakistan, you're the de facto enemy. That is the image of India. And so it depends, of course, on what replaces the current regime. I mean, clearly, I don't see, and I don't think anyone in India is seeing a return to a pre 1979 Iran.
Oh, no
Yes,
chance.
there will be more hardline for sure. But, when you come out of this whole disaster, you're going to be really weak. You're going to take a few years to rebuild internally and externally.
So, Ambassador Saab, when we talk about India-US relations, one question that people keep saying is, can we trust in the US again? Can India trust US again? And what US has done to India is nothing compared to what India has done to Iran. India has stood with Israel so much closely. India has done nothing for Iran in this entire 2 years. In fact, on every statement about condemning the US or Israel for attacking Iran, India is the one that has messed it up, whether it is SCO or whether it is BRICS, protecting either UAE or protecting Israel. So, in its moment of crisis for Iran, India has not really been there for Iran. Uh,
Well, we are in
so
good company. We are
but
in good company.
but to flip the question, like we say, can India ever trust the US? The question is, will Iranians trust India? That's my question.
Iran has been all alone, and that is the lesson when we talked about the global order and the reality of power politics. We were not Iran's allies. I mean, who had military and energy relationships with Iran,
The
which were
US.
10x, which were 10x of India? It was Russia and China.
Yeah,
The real allies of Iran were Russia on the military front, and on the energy front were China. 90% of Iran's oil was going to China.
still is.
What did either of these countries do to support Iran, either diplomatically, forget militarily? They did nothing. They didn't lift a finger. The only thing they did was low cost. Security Council resolution, some vote here, some vote there. But Iran found itself completely friendless. India made no such assurances to Iran. If there was a 20-year pact signed between Iran and major powers on a strategic arrangement, it was with Russia and China. So that's the first point. So if the accusation is that India didn't step up and support Iran, then I don't know which other country in the world. In fact, our position is much more similar to the European position, where
Yeah,
we have moderated. We have talked about diplomacy. We have always supported the GCPOA. We have never. But remember, I mean, before I come to my last point, the principle, the idea that a nuclear weapon in Iran is a problem is what we have been saying as far as Pakistan is concerned since 1998 and since even before. that
Yeah.
we don't see why a nuclear weapon in the hands of Pakistan is anywhere safer or more legitimate than in the hands of Iran. So we have our own issues. When we make decisions, we think from our own context, our limited context. But last on the point on this India's attitude on the BRICS, I was talking to our people. Do you know that in the last BRICS foreign ministers meeting, which was held just 2, 3, 4 weeks
Yeah.
ago
Yeah.
in
In May.
Delhi,
Yeah.
both UAE and Iran were in the same room on the same table, which was a huge achievement by itself when tensions were running high.
Yeah.
And do you know, I forget the exact numbers, but do you know, you can read it, it's in the public domain. Out of the 66 paragraphs of the chair's statement, because they could not issue a joint
Yeah.
communique, 65 of the 66 paragraphs were consensus. 65 of the 66 were consensus. The only paragraph on which there was no consensus was the war. So I think that speaks to the confidence both Iran and UAE has had in India. And I was told that we are basically all set for a summit because it's just one paragraph. So can you imagine if you read the communique, there was an entire consensus document, and only because of that one single paragraph, the outcome was a chair's statement, not a joint communique. So I think we should not overplay the. Of course, there are problems. I mean, you also have the Saudis who are also playing their own games. We are aware of them with the Pakistanis, but again, we have a good, very important relationship with the Saudis. So this and Iran is needed by us. On the Taliban matter, which you mentioned, you're right that we have a good relationship. And by the way, the demandeur in this case is the Taliban of
Mhm.
the relation for the relationship.
Yeah.
It's
Obviously.
not so much New Delhi. They are the ones who are desperate. And this is again shows to you how there are twists in history and where we began, where we have ended. You know, the creation of the Pakistani ISI for 20, 30 years is today turned its back and its head on its own master and is today seeking protection from India. And India is actually going slow.
Yeah. I understand that. I to me, what is fascinating a little bit about is that one of the things that the Iranian foreign minister also talked about was that the reason why they couldn't have a BRICS agreement was because India was being soft on Israel and would not allow any critical comments about Israel. That came out very clearly about their statement. But I want to segue into this. If you remember, it came as a huge shock to everybody when Trump announced 50% tariffs on India, especially the additional 25%. This was around August. And then suddenly Prime Minister Modi went to the SCO summit. I think it's in Tianjin in China.
Yeah,
And there was this photograph, where he's
yeah,
with Xi Jinping and Putin, and so there was all this talk about revival of RIC, etc. Which is RIC is the core of BRICS, really, if you look at it in that way. Uh, but to me, what was interesting at that time was that in 2023, I thought was a very important diplomatic year for India. India was the president of G20 as well as SCO, and India completely. I mean, I can say that as an American, that India completely sabotaged the SCO by making it virtual, so that they didn't want to be seen with either Putin or Xi Jinping just a few weeks after Biden had left. And then after that, the next one, I think it was in 2024, Prime Minister Modi didn't go to the SCO summit. Dr. Jaishankar went. I think that was in Kazan, if I'm not recalling well. But then suddenly things look bad with the US, and India is suddenly back at the SCO summit. Uh, but so what is happening with RIC? I mean, Americans are not troubled or impressed with this photo op with Modi taking this for. It's for, I think, for domestic consumption in India rather than anywhere else. But is RIC a real thing? Does it really have any geopolitical value? other than impressing domestic audiences for these three countries?
Look, the Tianjin photograph touched a raw nerve in in the West, and for some reason, whether you like it or not, it was headlines in all mainstream
Yeah,
Western newspapers and the media.
yeah,
And that was quite funny, actually, that suddenly they realized there is something called RIC when it has been in existence for, I don't know, 15, 20 years.
yeah,
So that was a little bizarre. Uh, by the way, Modi went to Kazan for the BRICS summit, I think it was, or the
it was a
SC, I
bit.
don't, yeah.
Yeah,
And that's when the ice broke with China,
yeah.
and after 2020, and that's how the normalization process began. The RIC is an idea. It is, I mean, it is there, it's on the table. Um, it is a geopolitical construct. It has a certain logic to it because they're all non-West, they're all Eurasia. They are proud of their civilizations,
Hmm.
of their independent identities. So, in good times, when relations between each of them are normal, it will do well, but it will always be a victim of bilateral problems between each other. So, obviously, after 2020, in the breakdown of the India China relationship, there was no question of the RIC going anywhere. Uh, Tianjin was, I think, a response to a lot of anger in India about this 50%, about this absolutely absurd accusation and the warmongering coming out of Washington from cabinet officials, absurd allegations that India was responsible for the Ukraine war, we were funding it and all,
Hmm.
ridiculous. So there was a huge amount of anger, and it's just that the government kind of kept its cool. But outside of the government, people were saying, what the hell is going on? I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, the Europeans built the Russian war chest by importing energy for the last, since 1950 or 60, for
Yeah.
50, 60 years. You built your entire economic prosperity on cheap Russian energy. And now, for the last 2 years, if India is importing, we are supposed to be responsible for the war? I mean, what is this nonsense? So there was zero credibility on the American allegations. And so this utilization of the Tianjin opportunity was to be expected in some way. Now, what is the substance of the RIC? As I said, not very much as a grouping. But of course, you've had expansion of the BRICS. This is again pre-Trump, which is interesting also. I mean, that why is it all happening? Why are countries who are friends of the West and all wanting to join BRICS? You need to ask that question also. So RIC, as I said, is a more of a concept, less of practical this thing,
Reality.
and that's how I think it will continue till we have some
If you got frozen, sir.
so from India's.
Yeah.
So that also is.
I think if BRICS becomes more stronger, then RIC will be subsumed and will remain part of the BRICS idea. This is my last question, Ambassador Saab. It appears in a way that India and Pakistan have decided to exchange. Like India is saying, "Tu Bangladesh le le, mujhe Afghanistan de de." It's like saying, "You take Bangladesh, give me Afghanistan." And so we suddenly find the relationship being toggled. The relationship between Pakistan and Bangladesh seems to have improved significantly after the removal of Sheikh Hasina. Even though I've looked at it, there's no change in trade or anything like that. There seems to be only geopolitical partnership, intelligence sharing, and stuff like that. Whereas India's relations with Afghanistan has improved. So So you have been India's ambassador in Bangladesh during the heydays, especially when most of the land disputes and border issues were resolved. You were right there at that time. And that is the only country with which India has resolved all of its.
Yeah.
So probably you are the father of that, those deals. So my question to you is that has India lost Bangladesh?
No, no. I mean, Sheikh Hasina was never going to be immortal.
Yeah.
She was never going to be prime minister for life. We all knew that there is a time when there will be a post Hasina dispensation. And I think everyone knew that any post Hasina dispensation would be right of center, would be Islamic. It would certainly not be an Awami League kind of a secular, the main, the strand of politics. So that has to be said. It's not as if we knew that unless Hasina was succeeded by someone from within the Awami, but that was also becoming quite clear over time that that is very unlikely to happen, and that even if it did happen, would not sustain. So we've never lost Bangladesh, even for example in 75 or 82, or we've lived through all kinds of uh, hostile and unfriendly dictators and governments, including Khalida Zia herself. Geography is a big
Mm.
determinant of life.
Geopolitics. Yeah.
And I don't think even today, despite the current kind of complexion of the government, anyone has the courage to stand in Dhaka University or on the square of Dhaka and declare that we need to go back as a confederation to Pakistan. He'll be lynched. The identity of Bangladesh and the success they have had vis-a-vis Pakistan in the last 50 years and the pride they have is not going to go away because of a political prime minister or a change. That has taken deep roots in society. Yes, what will definitely happen and is happening is these subterranean efforts by the Pakistani ISI and the military using the Jamaat and some others to develop an artificial kind of a sentiment of a is bigger Islamic or a Muslim confederation. But I mean, after all, the history of Bangladesh teaches you 1947 was supposed to be the golden era of for Indian Muslims. But within 5 years, you found that you had collapsed. In 52, the language movement began. So I don't see this is happening. I don't think we've lost. Yes, we have to reshape our relationship with Bangladesh, deal with the new people. It's okay. It's like an election, except this was not a normal election. The transition from Awami to BNP happened through Yunus, which was a completely bizarre situation. But effectively, at the end of the day, you have one government now compared to another one. We'll have to deal with a new set of people, with a new reality, and we will deal. I mean, the challenge is for us and for them also how we shape it. And I think the initial days are indicating that we are we are totally ready to deal with uh, this new setup and a new Bangladesh and the youth, and it's a new generation. The Pakistanis will definitely fish in troubled waters. There is absolutely no question. The Jamaat is breathing down the neck of the BNP. They have sensed power. It is possible they could, in some future date, assume full power. But we will see. The Jamaat itself has changed. The 71, the Jamaat of 71 is not the Jamaat of 2026.
No, 3, 4 days ago, I wrote an article about the challenges that Bangladesh faces, saying that for the current government, there are two challenges. One is basically fixing the economy. Their GDP is
Yeah.
growth rate has gone down to 3%, unemployment is high, and the other is Bangladesh has to deal with four nuclear powers: India, China, Pakistan, and America. Who are trying to influence it. So it has to deal with four major powers. So the second thing that this government has to do is rebalancing of this. And I think that the Pakistan is not fishing there alone; it's fishing in partnership with China. So for India, that it's not just Pakistan, Bangladesh; it's actually Pakistan, Bangladesh, China. So that article was published in the Diplomat. But one of the reactions I got after that article from some people in the US and others was they said, don't worry about this current administration. They're not going to last 5 years. They feel that the Jamaat will come in before that. They are under the perception that this administration of BNP may not last 5 years and the Jamaat is going to be in power very soon. Uh, it is a corollary to this question that India seems to be having these constant problems with neighbors, like Maldives saying India out, and now the Balan Shah's, whole opposition to India, China's Mansarovar relation thing. Uh, how is it that India, with all of its neighborhood first policy, etc., uh, seems to have so much trouble with all its neighbors except radical Islam? Sorry to come
No,
back to that. They seem to have problem with every neighbor except yes, things get better. Like we can say that today India, Bangladesh are in better position than they were last year. The same with Maldives, but uh, all of these should be like India's satellites. It doesn't make sense to me. I think they would benefit themselves if they were much closer to India, both economically and politically, than to compete with India or continue to resist India's regional leadership.
yeah. Look, I'm glad you're asking this question because, this is a view, and a lot of people have said this, including within India, who criticize. I've dealt a lot with the neighborhood and almost all of them. And so this question also comes to my mind. I mean, why and what is the solution? You have to dig a little deeper. Um, it's a matter, it's only time which is going to improve from 47 till today. You have 70, 80 years. If you go neighbor by neighbor, each one has a certain history and culture, background as far as India is concerned. It is not easy for them till as long as current political boundaries remain. India remains the size it is, the others remain the size they are. We will always have contradictions and difficulties in the relationships with our neighbors. It is a structural issue. It could be a policy issue. So you can change policy, you can correct policy, but what can you do about structures? Either you change boundaries, or I don't know what is the other solution. Till as long as you have the reality of the subcontinent as we know it. You tried one thing in 1947, you tried something else in 1971. All of these were meant to help improve the situation. So the structural aspects are going to always define how a big country like India will deal with tiny little countries who are constantly 24/7 engaged in defining identity and independence and sovereignty vis-a-vis India. They don't have to define identity, sovereignty, and independence vis-a-vis China or vis-a-vis the United States. But this is the project. If they do not do it with India, they cease to exist
Yeah.
as independent countries. So they are conflicted within their own elites. Sometimes they have expectations from India, like an Indian state would have from Delhi, like a member of the Indian Union would have. So they
Like
would
the
behave almost,
South India also is going to have the same
yes.
problem.
So they behave like that. Sometimes they behave like independent members of the United Nations. So this split personality, this multiple, these are the reasons. I mean, at one level, which explain. Uh, we have had a series of prime ministers, different governments in Delhi. You've gone through ups and downs. You've learned lots of lessons. The neighbors have also learned. But I would say at the end of the day, India uh, provides, and they know it, regardless of what they may say, provides them that shock absorber kind of a role, safety valve to the smaller neighbors. I think it's important to recognize their identity and independence. And yes, we are a punching bag. I mean, We know it. It is going to be like that. There is no magic wand. There is no silver bullet. I can go through with you neighbor by neighbor to say this is what we
Yeah.
have done. But is that enough? No, it's not enough. And also on what you said about the China, Pakistan, this thing in Bangladesh. Yes, I mean it is there. But remember, Tariq Rahman lived in London for 17 years. He
Yeah.
has no Chinese connection. If he has any connections, they are with the
Yes.
British and the Americans.
Yeah. They, I for the last 10 years, I ran a program as an academic director for the State Department on foreign policy. So we used to bring in scholars a lot, and definitely from Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, India. So every year for the last 10 years, I've been talking to scholars from South Asia. And one thing that kept coming out from, other than the Indian scholar, everybody, especially Sri Lankans and Bangladeshis, more than Pakistanis, say one of the mistakes that India has made is by not allowing SAARC to become influential. And if SAARC had remained strong, India was having problems with Pakistan in SAARC, and therefore India has kind of downplayed the importance. Do you think that the absence of some kind of a regional organization which is effective, like African Union or in other parts of the world that we have, including in Western Hemisphere, Europe obviously is the benchmark. Do you think that that is one of India's failures, not building a regional organization which is
No, 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 no. You cannot compare South Asia or the subcontinent with the European Union. There is no comparison. It's a good theoretical, conceptual comparison and a point to make. But all you have to do is open your map and look at the subcontinent and look at India and look at the rest. What is Nepal going to trade with Sri Lanka? Or what is Afghanistan going to trade with Bhutan? You know, this business of SAARC and its absence and the need for its revival, I have very strong views on it. I think SAARC is useless. It has done nothing. The only thing which SAARC has done is given a platform for Pakistan to sit in front of six others
in
and pillory India, embarrass India, and sabotage. And I've told this to the Pakistanis on their face. And to ensure that anything which India does, you sabotage and stymie, and to grandstand in front of the smallers and become some kind of a peculiar spokesperson for these smaller countries who don't need any spokesperson. So the SAARC record on any metric has been zero. I don't understand what is the benefit of SAARC that we can see that today the Pakistanis are the biggest proponents. They are the ones who destroyed SAARC. In fact, any sub-regional cooperation that has moved forward has been outside of the SAARC framework. So today it's really a peculiar situation where they seem to be swearing by SAARC when they are the ones who destroyed it. I have sat in dozens of meetings where the only thing that happens in SAARC is that the Nepals and the Bhutans and the Sri Lankas of the world will sit quietly and watch these two fight. Who wants to go back to that path again? So we will have to create a different model of regional cooperation, which we have tried through other mechanisms with varying success, but it's
like
much
BIMSTEC,
better like
like BIMSTEC.
BIMSTEC or BBIN. It's much better to sit in a room of five people who actually are willing to work together rather than have one person in the room, which is the bad egg, whose job and whose existence lies in sabotage. I mean, we created the South Asian University in India, a
Yeah.
great Manmohan Singh project. You look at the condition of this experiment. I mean, it's all because of the India-Pakistan thing that it's lying in a limbo. I mean, we are trying to revive it, but the idea was so grand.
It was a great idea.
Knowledge without borders.
In fact, I went to a think tank in Colombo and gave a talk, and it was called Regional Security Studies Program (RSS). And the person who was there was a former secretary of foreign secretary of Sri Lanka. But all the students had their masters in international relations from the South Asian University, and all their teachers were Indian. people that I have been with on several shows, and they said, "Oh, we have seen you, Professor, with our professor on this show in India or that show." So that was the first. That's the only concrete thing that I have seen of SAARC, and all of them were very clear that was something that India had done and should be doing. Ambassador Saab, it has been a joy talking to you, and
Thank you very much.
you've been very
Thank
frank, and I have learned a lot, and I hope my
Thank you
audience
so
also
much.
learns. But we will continue with this dialogue, and I'll keep coming back to you in the future. But thank you very much for joining Khanversations and enlightening us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me over and wish you all the best. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.